By mid-1943, the skies over occupied France were a brutal classroom. The Thunderbolt had begun to prove its worth, but it still needed a moment, one single act of defiance, to silence the laughter of the Luftwaffe forever. That moment came on June 26, 1943. Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson, of the 56th Fighter Group, the famed Zemke's Wolfpack, took off from Horsham St. Faith Airfield on what should have been a routine escort mission. The weather was calm, visibility clear, but fate had other plans. Somewhere over northern France, German fighters struck. Johnson's P-47, call sign Half Pint, was hit. Cannon shells tore through the fuselage, shredding control cables and punching holes the size of fists through the wings. One round exploded in the cockpit, wounding him in the leg and face. Another jammed his canopy shut, trapping him inside. Oil covered my goggles. Smoke filled the cockpit. I thought, this is it. But the Thunderbolt kept flying. Bleeding and half-blinded, Johnson tried to bail out. But the canopy wouldn't budge. He had no choice but to fight the aircraft home. Alone, crippled and falling behind, he pushed the throttle forward. The massive Pratt and Whitney R-2800 roared to life, dragging the battered fighter toward the English Channel. Then, out of nowhere, a FW-190 appeared behind him. The German pilot, an ace, saw an easy kill. He closed in and opened fire. For what felt like eternity, the 190 raked the Thunderbolt with machine gun fire. Johnson braced for the explosion that never came. The canopy shattered, armor buckled. But the P-47 refused to die. The German pulled alongside, looked over at the bloodied American still fighting his controls, and, in disbelief, raised his hand in salute before turning away. Robert Johnson limped his mangled Thunderbolt back across the channel and crash-landed at base. Mechanics counted over 200 bullet holes. Not one round had hit a vital system. "We couldn't believe it," one crew chief said. "That thing was more holes than airplane." From that day on, the legend was sealed. News of Johnson's miraculous survival spread through every squadron. Pilots who once doubted their machine now trusted it with their lives. They began to fly with confidence, aggression even. They dove harder, fired longer, and fought smarter. And the Luftwaffe began to take notice. German aces, who once mocked the P-47 as a clumsy target, now faced a nightmare, an enemy that wouldn't die. Reports reached Berlin, describing Thunderbolts that kept fighting even after being hit dozens of times. One pilot wrote in frustration, "The American is protected as if by armor from a tank. We empty our guns, and he still flies." The flying milk bottle had been reborn, in fire, in blood, and in defiance. From this moment on, the Luftwaffe's laughter turned into something else entirely: fear. By early 1944, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt was no longer a question mark. It was a statement of power, precision, and American industrial might. The laughter of 1943 had vanished, replaced by something else in the Luftwaffe's ready rooms: unease. The Americans had learned. The Thunderbolt's pilots now flew in disciplined formations, exploiting the fighter's altitude advantage and devastating dive speed. They no longer tried to outturn their enemies. They struck from above, unleashed their fury, and disappeared before the Germans could react. And when they attacked, the sky itself seemed to rip apart. Each P-47 carried 8 Browning M2.50 caliber machine guns, each capable of firing 750 rounds per minute. That meant over 100 rounds per second per aircraft. Multiply that by a full squadron of Thunderbolts, and you had a storm of metal, a wall of lead that no fighter could survive. One German report described it plainly. Their firepower is monstrous. It is as if the sky erupts. The P-47's enormous ammunition load, over 3,400 rounds, allowed it to stay in combat longer than any Allied fighter. It didn't just strike, it annihilated. Then came the upgrade that changed everything, the paddle blade propeller. Introduced in 1944, this wider reshaped prop drastically improved climb rate and acceleration. Suddenly, the Thunderbolt could reach combat altitude faster and match the Luftwaffe's best fighters in a climb. Combined with the turbo supercharger, it became almost unbeatable above 25,000 feet. The Luftwaffe, once dominant in Europe's skies, was now being hunted from above and below. Colonel Hub Zemke, commander of the 56th Fighter Group, perfected new tactics. His pilots attacked in waves, diving from the sun, shredding enemy formations, and climbing back to altitude before the Germans could respond. The results were staggering. In one mission alone, a group of Thunderbolts destroyed 16 enemy aircraft without a single loss. Their kill-to-loss ratios began to climb, and soon the Luftwaffe realized the ugly truth. The flying milk bottle had become their worst nightmare. At first, we laughed at it, then we feared it. Now we avoid it, and the Thunderbolt wasn't done. Beneath its wings, engineers began fitting bombs and rockets, transforming it from a high-altitude escort into a fearsome fighter bomber. The same toughness that had saved Robert Johnson now made it perfect for low-level ground attacks. Railways, bridges, convoys, nothing was safe. The Luftwaffe tried to adapt, but by now they were fighting an enemy that could replace every loss and build more. The Thunderbolt wasn't just a weapon of war, it was a symbol of industrial inevitability. In the space of a single year, the P-47 had evolved from a laughingstock to the master of the European sky. The walls of Let It Unleashed became the rhythm of Allied air power, and the prelude to the Luftwaffe's downfall. From ridicule to fear, the transformation was complete. By 1944, Luftwaffe pilots coined a new phrase, Jabo fever, short for Jagdbomber or fighter bomber. The mere sound of approaching P-47s sent German ground troops scrambling for cover. Even Adolf Galland, the famed Luftwaffe general, later admitted, "We made a terrible mistake in underestimating it." The Thunderbolt became the hammer of Allied air power, a relentless predator that hunted supply lines, convoys, and trains with ruthless precision. Its heavy armor let it dive into anti-aircraft fire and survive. Its turbo supercharger let it rule at altitudes where no German piston fighter could climb. At 30,000 feet, the Luftwaffe gasped for air. The Thunderbolt was just getting started. By 1945, the Republic P-47 was not just a fighter, it was an army in the sky. Thunderbolts destroyed 86,000 railway cars, 9,000 locomotives, and 68,000 trucks. German logistics collapsed under relentless aerial assault. The aircraft's ability to carry rockets and 2,500 pounds of bombs turned it into a flying fortress. One pilot recalled, "We could take a direct hit from flak, drop our payload, and still fly home with half a wing." Factories, supply lines, and troop columns vanished in explosions of fire and steel. Every roar of the P-47's engine sent terror across occupied Europe. It wasn't beauty that won the war in the air. It was endurance, firepower, and American industrial might. From mockery to immortality, the Thunderbolt's journey came full circle. When the war ended in 1945, 15,683 P-47s had been built, a monument to industrial strength and strategic genius. The aircraft, once laughed at as the flying milk bottle, became a symbol of unstoppable power. Pilots who once doubted it wept when they turned in their beloved jugs. The Luftwaffe's best, men like Galland, Hartmann, and Roll, all acknowledged its dominance. The Thunderbolt proved that victory in the air wasn't about elegance. It was about resilience, innovation, and raw power. Even today, when one of these mighty machines roars to life at an air show, veterans still turn their heads and remember the sound that changed the war, the sound of thunder. In 1942, while Europe burned and the skies over Germany filled with smoke and thunder, a new American fighter rolled out of the Republic Aviation Plant in Farmingdale, New York. It was big, too big, some said. At nearly 7 tons loaded, the aircraft dwarfed the nimble Spitfires and Messerschmitts already dueling above Europe. This was the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, and when Allied pilots first saw it, they laughed. "It looks like a flying milk bottle," one pilot quipped. "A milk bottle with wings. Even the engineers who built it weren't sure it would fly. With its bulbous fuselage, massive radial engine, and wide belly, it seemed more like a bomber than a fighter." The Luftwaffe, when shown reconnaissance photos, dismissed it entirely. German intelligence labeled the aircraft ein amerikanischer Witz, an American joke, but behind that oversized frame lay something extraordinary, a Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine, capable of producing more than 2,000 horsepower. It was one of the most powerful engines ever put on a single-seat fighter, and when fitted with a revolutionary turbo supercharger, it could breathe at altitudes above 30,000 feet, where German fighters gasped for air. The U.S. Army Air Forces didn't need another joke. They needed a weapon, something that could escort bombers across enemy territory and survive whatever the Luftwaffe threw at it. The Mustang wasn't ready. The P-38 Lightning was fast but complex, so the P-47 was rushed into production. By early 1943, hundreds of Thunderbolts were being crated and shipped to England. On the airfields of East Anglia, American pilots eyed their new mount with skepticism. It was heavy, sluggish on takeoff, and burned fuel like a drunk sailor. "If this is our answer to the Messerschmitt, we're in trouble," one pilot said. Still, they strapped in, trusting American engineering, and maybe a little luck. What no one realized yet was that beneath its awkward shell lay an indestructible heart. The P-47 was about to face its first test, and the skies over Europe would soon learn that this milk bottle could bite. The mockery was about to turn into a legend. In 1939, before the world was at war, Republic Aviation was just another struggling manufacturer trying to survive in the shadow of bigger names like Boeing and Lockheed. But deep within its Long Island hangars, a brilliant designer named Alexander Kartveli was sketching something that defied every convention of fighter design. Kartveli, a Georgian immigrant who had fled Soviet Russia, believed in one principle: if it must fight, it must survive. He had already learned that lightly built fighters might win races, but not wars. When the Army Air Corps asked for a new high-altitude interceptor, Kartveli and his team envisioned a beast, not a bird. What emerged on the drawing board was the XP-47B, a massive machine dominated by its round, thunderous heart. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine. To tame that power, Kartveli insisted on a turbo supercharger system mounted in the rear fuselage, connected to the engine through a complex maze of ducts and intercoolers. It was a mechanical symphony, one that few believed could ever work. It was the most complicated installation ever attempted in a single-engine fighter, said one Republic engineer. But Kartveli would not compromise. Every bolt, every panel screamed over engineering. The Thunderbolt's fuselage was thick with armor plating. Its landing gear was rugged enough to take punishment on muddy English airfields. It carried 8.50 caliber Browning machine guns, 4 in each wing, a staggering loadout that promised devastating firepower. Yet all this made the P-47 heavy. Too heavy, critics said. It tipped the scales at over 10,000 pounds, nearly twice the weight of a Spitfire. Test pilots worried it would handle like a brick, but when the first prototype flew on May 6, 1941, the skies thundered. The XP-47B climbed faster than expected, its turbocharger howling like a storm. At 30,000 feet, it didn't just hold altitude, it thrived there. The Luftwaffe didn't yet know it, but the Americans were building a fighter that could outclimb, outdive, and outlast anything Germany had. But when the first prototype flew, on May 6, 1941, the skies thundered. The XP-47B climbed faster than expected, its turbocharger howling like a storm. At 30,000 feet, it didn't just hold altitude, it thrived there. The Luftwaffe didn't yet know it, but the Americans were building a fighter that could outclimb, outdive, and outlast anything Germany had. If you want a racehorse, buy a Mustang, he joked. But if you want a warhorse, build a Thunderbolt. By late 1942, the Republic factory ran day and night, lit like a small city. Thousands of workers, men and women, toiled under its metal roof, riveting wings and testing engines. The assembly lines were alive with purpose. America's industrial might was awakening, and the Thunderbolt was its metallic symbol. The stage was set. The first combat squadrons in Europe would soon take this flying fortress into the war-torn skies of France and Germany. The mockery would continue, but not for long, because in the crucible of war, even ridicule can be forged into legend. Spring, 1943. The airfields of East Anglia, England, are alive with the sound of engines warming up. Rows of P-47 Thunderbolts gleam in the pale morning sun, their aluminum skins reflecting the promise of a new era in American air power. But beneath the confidence, there's tension. The pilots of the 4th Fighter Group, many of them veterans of the RAF's Eagle squadrons, aren't impressed. They've traded their nimble Spitfires for these lumbering beasts, and they're not happy about it. She climbs like a bulldozer and drinks fuel like one. If this is our ticket to Berlin, God help us. Their mission: escort American bombers, B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators, deep into enemy territory. It was the first time Thunderbolts would face the Luftwaffe head-on. On April 8, 1943, the P-47s crossed the English Channel for the first time under combat conditions. The pilots scanned the horizon nervously. Somewhere up there, the Luftwaffe waited. Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf 190s, sleek and deadly. When contact came, it was swift and merciless. The German fighters dove from the sun, their cannons spitting fire. The Thunderbolts, slow to climb and heavy to turn, were caught off guard. In minutes, 3 P-47s were burning. Others limped back to base, riddled with holes. The radio filled with desperate calls. "Mayday! Mayday! I've lost oil pressure. They're on me. Can't shake him." When the surviving pilots landed, they were shaken and humiliated. The Luftwaffe had lived up to its terrifying reputation. The Germans even joked in intercepted radio chatter. "The Americans send us milk bottles to fight with." The insult stung. Back in England, frustration boiled over. Engineers blamed pilots for mishandling the complex turbo system. Pilots blamed engineers for building a flying tank that couldn't turn. Morale dropped. But something else was happening. Something critical. Each failed sortie, each engine failure, each lost aircraft provided new data. American mechanics were learning faster than their enemies realized. They modified supercharger controls, refined fuel systems, and trained pilots to use the aircraft's real strength, its power in a dive. The P-47 couldn't turn with a 109, but it could dive faster than anything else in the sky. At full throttle, with gravity on its side, the Thunderbolt became a screaming metal comet. Over the next few weeks, tactics began to change. Pilots learned to fight like their aircraft, to use weight as a weapon, not a weakness. Still, in the spring of 1943, the Thunderbolt's reputation was fragile. The Luftwaffe laughed. American pilots doubted, and Washington worried. But the seeds of transformation had been planted. In the months to come, the Luftwaffe would stop laughing, because the P-47 was about to evolve from a clumsy newcomer into a terrifying symbol of Allied air supremacy. By the summer of 1943, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt had survived its first bruising encounters with the Luftwaffe, and so had its pilots. They had learned the hard way that brute strength alone wouldn't win dogfights. But slowly, painfully, they began to unlock the secrets of their massive new machine. The first lesson came from altitude. The Thunderbolt's enormous turbo supercharger gave it a unique advantage. While most fighters gasped for air above 25,000 feet, the P-47 could still climb, still breathe, still fight. Pilots learned to lure German fighters upward, to the thin, freezing air where the Luftwaffe's finely tuned engines began to sputter. Up there, the tables turned. The 190s started coughing, and we were still charging. The second lesson was the dive. The P-47 was heavy, yes, but that weight made it nearly indestructible in a dive. In the hands of a skilled pilot, it could plummet from 30,000 feet like a thunderbolt, literally. German pilots chasing one down often found themselves in a trap. When the Luftwaffe tried to follow, their lighter planes began to tear apart under the strain. The Thunderbolt, with its thick wings and rugged airframe, held steady. The Americans had found their weapon, speed through gravity. Then came firepower. 8 Browning M2.5 zero-caliber machine guns, 4 in each wing, made the P-47 the heaviest armed Allied fighter in the sky. With over 3,400 rounds of ammunition, it could unleash a wall of lead that shredded anything in its path. A single burst could cut through a Messerschmitt or rip a Focke-Wulf to ribbons. Slowly, the mockery faded. Pilots who once sneered at the milk bottle began to respect its toughness. Stories spread across the 8th Air Force of planes returning with wings full of holes, engines smoking, tails half shot away, yet somehow still flying home. One squadron commander put it best: "You can shoot a Thunderbolt full of holes and it still brings you home. She's ugly, but she's loyal." The Thunderbolt was more than a fighter now. It was a friend, a guardian, a brute that refused to die. Republic Aviation continued refining the design, improving cockpit visibility, strengthening wings, and optimizing the supercharger system. Every mission, every report fed back into the factory. It was the beginning of an evolution, born directly from combat. And in the skies over Europe, that evolution was about to pay off. The Luftwaffe had grown complacent, convinced that German engineering still ruled the air. But as summer turned to autumn in 1943, they began to notice something unnerving. The big American fighter that once stumbled through the clouds was now diving out of the sun, faster, louder, and deadlier than ever before. The hunters were about to become the hunted.